Hello, and welcome to the episode that will forever be known as the one where Bullock makes toast. You'll see why after the theme song. Hey everybody, episode 2 of our first series on analysis. Back in episode 1, I talked about my 2 rules, which really underlie everything that I'm going to be talking about when I talk about analysis in this series. That was the No Waldo's rule and the Ebert rule. If you did not watch episode 1, I really recommend you take a look at it, even though I'm not going to specifically reference either of those rules. They really will help you kind of understand what you should be doing when you write an analysis. One thing I did not do in that episode, because I was trying to keep it short, I did not actually provide a definition of what analysis is. So let's do that now. Analysis means explaining the choices an author makes to achieve a particular effect or purpose. And there are actually 2 parts to the analysis. Number 1 is identifying the choices that the author has made. But if you remember the No Waldo's rule, simply identifying those choices is not enough. You need to go beyond it, and you need to write. Sometimes it might be in a speech, but mostly in an English class, when we say analysis, you have to write. You have to write where you talk about those choices, and you talk about the effects of those choices and how, as suggested by the Ebert rule, those choices make this text different from other texts that might have a similar theme or main idea. Even if a text is about the same thing as another text, the how that it's about it is different. Okay? If I could use an analogy for a second, what's that? Analogy? You're not, okay. An analogy basically means that an author or a speaker, in this case, me, I am taking an unfamiliar concept like analysis, and I'm comparing it to a familiar concept like a toaster, so that you can better understand, or the audience can better understand, how that unfamiliar concept works. Toasters. Most of us, most of the time, when we interact with a toaster, it is to take our bread or our toaster waffles or our bagels or our toaster naan. Seriously, I'm not a paid spokesperson for the toaster naan, but this stuff is amazing. You should get some and you should eat it all the time. We put our thing into the toaster, we press the thing down, and a minute or 2 later, up pops the toast. That's all we really need to do to get toast. But there are some people who, when they are making the toast and looking at the toaster, what they want is not just toast. They want to know how that toaster works. What is it about this device that takes normal bread and turns it into toasted bread? So what those people might do, and please do not try this at home, and if you do try this at home, please do not blame me when you get yelled at, and absolutely please unplug the toaster from the wall before you try. So you might take the toaster, you might take a screwdriver, you might take a hammer, and pull the toaster apart. Look at the pieces of the toaster and try to figure out, how do these pieces work together to make my toast? That's the first of the 2 steps in writing an analysis, where you identify the features of a text or the choices that an author has made. You're identifying the different pieces of the toaster and what each one of those pieces does to make the toast. This is a process that we sometimes call close reading. Maybe you've heard those 2 words used together as a phrase before. Maybe that phrase is completely new to you. But close reading is an important skill. It is mentioned repeatedly in the documentation around the Common Core State Standards, for example, that you, students, need to have a pretty clear grasp of what close reading is, and you need to be able to do close reading on any text that you observe. And close reading, I'll put the definition here. Close reading just simply means you are reading to see how a text works. You are reading the text to look for the pieces and what those pieces do. Now, just like most of the time when we're dealing with a toaster, we're just trying to make toast. Most of the time when we read, we are not doing analysis. We are not doing a close reading. We are reading for information. We are reading for pleasure. We are reading so that we don't get yelled at book club anymore because we didn't finish reading the book. And I'm sorry, Marjorie. I'm sorry. I hope you're happy kicking me out of book club. I was the fun. Anyway. So, when you are assigned to do an analysis, you actually have to start thinking differently. The same way that somebody making toast and starts wondering how do the pieces of this toaster come together to make toast, you've got to think that way about the text that you're reading. How do all of these pieces come together to make this text and to make this text work? Because once you've disassembled your toaster, if you try to put it back together just randomly or in a way that you think makes sense but isn't necessarily the original manufacturer's specifications, you're not gonna get toast. Same would be true with like a poem. You take the words or the phrases or the letters from a poem and you rearrange them, you could maybe get a new poem, but it would not be the same poem. It would not use the same techniques and it would not have the same effects as the original poem. So close reading is where you read on purpose to look for the things about a text that make that particular text work. Then, of course, you have to write. But I'll get to that shortly. So what are some things that you can look for? Well, there are obvious ones that I've already mentioned either in this episode or in the previous episode, things like metaphors, similes, symbols, particularly with literary text. These are important. But I would suggest starting with two often overlooked things about texts that are critical, but students, as I said, overlook them. One of them is the structure of a text, and another one is patterns that are established in that text. And in order to really get at this, I'm going to use a poem. It's not the same poems that I used for episode 1. This is Maya Angelou. It's a poem called The Health Food Diner. I am going to put it up on the screen for about 5 seconds, and just like in the last episode, you really need to pause it, read that poem, and then I will see you on the other side. Okay, The Health Food Diner. Structure. Obviously, it is a poem. It looks like a poem. It is a poem. And it has a structure that a lot of poems will have. It's got these 4-line stanzas. And Angelou uses these 4-line stanzas except at line 17. Because at line 17, it's not a stanza at all. It's the single word to. So we got the structure. There's a place where that structure breaks. And if you noticed that when you were reading it, if you were like, what's the deal with the word to, just sitting out there, hanging out there all alone by itself, that's good. It means that you've got an eye for recognizing when structures break. And that kind of leads us into the second thing that you should look for, not just the structure. And obviously with other kinds of text, the structure will be different. It could be structured as a cause and effect. It could be structured as a narrative with a story that always moves forward. There are lots of different structures. But the second thing, got distracted for a second. The second thing is patterns. So the structure kind of looks at the big picture. How is this thing put together? Patterns gets a little bit closer. So within each of these 4-line stanzas that Angelou is using in this poem, what are some things that are happening? Well, you notice the pattern of rhyme. Let's look at it again. You see, for example, in the first stanza, cake and steak rhyme, in the second stanza, toast and roast, and so on, all the way down to scores and carnivores at the end of the poem. These rhymes are an important part of the pattern, but you will also notice that within the third line of each stanza, there's an internal rhyme. Look at it again. Straw and raw in line 3, mashed and hashed in line 7, help and kelp in line 11, and so on. And that kind of rhyme makes me, I don't know about you, makes me kind of think of a limerick. There once was a man from Nantucket kind of thing. Don't Google that. And in addition to the rhymes, there's also this kind of bouncy rhythm. Look at the first line again. No sprouted wheat and soya shoots. Okay, I'm exaggerating that a little bit, but she uses what's called an iamb, A-I-M-B, as her unit of poetry, or her metrical foot, to get all complicated. You don't have to be all complicated. You can just say da 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 da. That has this sort of jaunty, loose, informal rhythm. The iamb, in fact, is what Shakespeare used in most of his writing. Shall I compare thee to a summer's, etc. To be or not to be, that is, that you get the idea. But Shakespeare used it because it's our natural, informal way of talking. That's how conversation goes. That's how conversation goes. So, thinking about that limerick-style rhyme and this bouncy rhythm, are we meant to take this poem seriously? Is this the poem that's going to win her the Pulitzer Prize or the Nobel Prize for Literature? No. And in fact, this poem is kind of funny, the way that she makes fun of people who are overly conscious about health foods, the people who don't eat the things that she likes, because that's another pattern. Take a look at line 4, line 8, and line 12. Line 4, today I need a steak. 8, I'm dreaming of a roast. 12, I count on breaded veal. You can hear that bounce in my voice as I read these, but what else do you notice about those lines? Exactly. They're in parentheses. She has established a pattern of putting the things that she really wants into parentheses. Why do people put things in parentheses? Is it because they want the whole world to know this is my most important point, I'm going to put it in? No. They put something in parentheses because they want it as an aside, or they want it quiet, they want it unspoken. So maybe while she's making fun of the kelp-eating health food people, Angelou still has some insecurity about the things that she wants for herself, and that's why she hides them in parentheses. But what about after that line 17, that one single word too, that hangs out there in the open? Well, you'll notice that again, there's a change in the pattern. Instead of using the stanzas to list the things that the health food people are doing, she uses the stanzas to list her own things. Let's take a look at lines 18 for a little bit after that. Loins of pork and chicken thighs, and standing ribs so prime, pork chops brown and fresh ground round, I crave them all the time. So she's maybe now a little bit more open about the things that she wants. She's not hiding them in parentheses anymore, but notice what is in parentheses. It's this idea that she is constantly craving these meats, and these meats that are probably really bad for her, at least compared to the health food people. But remember, she's making fun of the health food people. You can see that in some of the things she says, and I'm not going to get too far into it. But then you may have noticed that I did not read anything from her fourth stanza or her last stanza, because look at those. They completely lack parentheses. And let's think about why. I'm going to put it up again. Both lines 16 and 25 are external images. Her running to this food that she wants, and her being a carnivore who's smoking cigarettes. They're not her own internal thoughts. They're not the things that she really wants instead of health food, or perhaps that little bit of embarrassment about her cravings. They are instead things that can be easily observed, and there's no way to hide them. So as she establishes this pattern, of parentheses, and then she breaks it. She established this pattern of, I'm going to talk about the health food people for 3 lines and then myself, and then she breaks it for the end of the poem. And she establishes the structure of every stanza's got this particular rhythm and this particular rhyme scheme, and it's 4 lines long, but then she breaks it with that single word, to. And she's doing all of this. She's establishing a structure and breaking it, and establishing a pattern and breaking it, again, to get at her main idea that these health food nuts are mostly just nuts. They're skinny, unhealthily skinny, and seriously obsessed with kelp. And it's not that she doesn't have her own problems. I mean, you guys know not to smoke, right? I mean, she talks about being a cigarette smoker, but don't smoke, kids. It'll kill you. But she thinks and she feels that she is much better off than these health food obsessed people crammed into this diner eating terrible, terrible food. Okay, and so to close, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Bullock, you rambled on about the health food diner for, 20 minutes. Feels like 20 minutes here in the studio. But you didn't actually present it the way I, a student, am being asked to present my own analysis. Because remember, analysis is not just identifying the things, but also being able to write about those things and how those things work to make a particular point or to achieve a particular purpose. Well, you are in luck. I actually did write an analysis of the health food diner by Maya Angelou, and it is linked in the description below. You are welcome to download it. It's about 800 words. It's a pretty thorough analysis, I believe, of the text. You can keep this and use it as a mentor text for your own analysis. I purposely chose a poem that, while good and from a talented, widely taught poet, this is a poem that's not necessarily taught very much in high schools. So don't feel like you can just download this analysis and be ready to turn it in when your teacher says, here's the health food diner by Maya Angelou, write an analysis, because that's not going to happen. But you can use that analysis as a template or as an outline, as a mentor for the analysis papers that you do write in class. In our next episode, we're going to talk about something else that is obvious but often overlooked when students do analysis, and that's tone. I will see you for the next one.
Said the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls, the tenement halls, whispering sounds of silence.